All right, we are ready to go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Kim. I'm a senior instructional designer at University Online Education Services at Rutgers University. On behalf of the 2025 Rutgers University Online Learning Conference, I welcome Stacy Schwartz, an assistant professor at Rutgers Business School. During the presentation, please engage using the live chat, and then you may pause any questions you have. And Stacy, Dr. Schwartz, will answer in the end of her presentation or as she goes along. Stacy, your turn.
All right, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining me at probably your last breakout session of the day. So I appreciate your sticking around and bearing with me and joining me today. So in the spirit of my topic, which is maximizing online student engagement through case-based learning, I thought I would start off with a simple case. So specifically, I want you to put yourselves in the shoes of Cynthia Carroll. Cynthia is the CEO of Anglo American, which is one of the world's largest mining companies. And this is a picture of a mine just to get yourself there mentally. And they are $25 billion in sales, 162,000 employees. 2/3 of those employees are based in South Africa. And just 4 months into your new job as CEO, unfortunately, you have learned the awful news that there has been another fatality inside one of your mines in South Africa. So after 4 months on the job, you have to make this really tough decision. Are you going to shut down the mine or not? And just because I seem to have lost my controllers here. But just because we have Jim and Melinda who've commented, I'll pick on them. Jim, would you shut down the mine or not? Yes or no? You could write it in the chat. Who the hell knows, right? You have no idea. Very limited information. Now, what if I told you that not only do you have to decide if you're going to shut down the mine or not in a classroom like this, but you also have to be on the hook for about 15 minutes explaining why you made that decision to shut down the mine or not. Because there's not a wrong answer, as most people who teach, case method believe. There's not generally a wrong answer, but the why needs to be defended by facts in the case. So what happens in a classroom like this, which this is a shot from Harvard Business School, and I had this terrifying experience in my master's program here where everything was taught by case method, including accounting and finance and lots of things, in my opinion, that should not be taught by case method. But regardless, you are cold called. So when you walk in the room, you walk in with an opinion about the case that you were to prepare for class. And you are meant to have an opinion, yes or no, should we shut down the mine or not, and why? And if you happen to be the lucky person cold called that day, you are on the hook for about 15 minutes, where the professor will help, ask you follow-up questions and lots of pushback and understand from you your opinion and why, and start to really populate the board. And during those 15 minutes, the other 89 people in the classroom are formulating their responses to all of your arguments. So, well, if you said yes, why will they say no? And when the professor has enough time with you and has enough of those initial facts on the board, then you open it up to the classroom and they say, okay, who disagrees with Jim? And then if it's not thank you enough to be on the hook for 15 minutes in front of everybody, answering and re-answering and doubling down and finding exhibits and finding data and all of that stuff, the other 89 people raise their hand and explain why you were wrong. Okay, so this all sounds really intimidating. It kind of is. but it's also really dynamic and really brings the class learning to a different level. If you've never been in a case method kind of classroom or led one, it's really remarkable how, you know, it enables you to learn from your peers, and the pace of the class is like popcorn. If a professor in this kind of classroom is not lecturing, they're not even necessarily traditionally teaching, they are facilitating the popcorn to happen, right? So as everyone is role playing and debating and voting and making arguments and counter arguments, all of the boards are getting populated, and it's an all in kind of lean forward, engaging type of a classroom. And it's fun, and you're challenged, and you realize at the end of these, especially after doing 10 of these a week for 2 years, you realize that, you know, I learn more with a group like this that's eclectic and diverse and dynamic and different experiences than I could have ever learned on my own. And so, what I've been doing here at Rutgers for the past 10 years as a full time professor is I've really been trying to replicate that in my online classrooms, because it really generates these, 7 key things that you can do better than one could do on their own. The first is preparation. So, walking in the room, students have to prepare. They have to know when they walk in if they're going to say yes or no and all their reasons why, because they fear the cold call. And you know that everyone gets a turn at being cold called. You just never know when yours is going to be. So you not only prepare for class, you prepare for class with a study group before class, because you want to be that sure and you want to have your arguments that defended that you develop your own sort of microcosm of eclectic people to come up with reasons and why, and then you bring them all into your separate sections. That's the preparation. The second thing you learn, beyond, of course, the content you're supposed to learn, like accounting or finance or something else, is discernment. Cases are big. They're sometimes 30 pages. They have 10 exhibits. You have to cut through all the facts, all the context, all the clutter, and tease out the most important data. So how do you decide yes or no? Well, there's a lot of information in there. I have to be able to look through the forest, see the trees that I need to make this decision, and make a decision kind of quickly because I'm being cold called, right? So there's a lot of information in the case that you can't digest fully. So you have to, with all of this information, pick out the most important. The third thing is bias recognition. After, 10 of these a week for multiple years, you start to realize, when I read these kinds of cases, I always come at them from a certain perspective. I come at them, for myself, coming from a marketing background. So I'm going to think about the customer maybe first before someone else is thinking about the employees first. I come at every case as a woman, right? I come at every case being from America or being white. So I start to realize only through this sort of dynamic nature of the whole room contributing and everyone taking turns and doing a lot of active listening and having strong opinions that you have to make really quickly, I've come to realize my own biases better, and the fact that a more diverse team comes to a better conclusion. My judgment improved through this whole process. I have to take on the role of a protagonist. I have to make an argument with very limited information, only based on the knowledge in the case, because I don't have knowledge of mining. I don't know about you guys, but I know nothing about mining. So I have to sort of take what's there and make a decision. Collaboration. I mentioned the popcorn piece. Well, that's the give and take. That's the who disagrees, with Jim and why. And, could we see someplace in the middle that we both agree? And well, what would be the implications for the shareholders? You really coming together to figure out this problem from multiple levels. And then finally, curiosity and self-confidence. So curiosity, just because every, week, every session, we're talking about different industries, you're putting yourselves in a different position, and self-confidence because it's a real stretch. So to think of yourself when you're in school as a CEO, like you would trust what I would guess, what I would think I might do when I'm a CEO. I don't think I'll be a CEO maybe ever, or maybe in 20 years, but the fact that you're asking me to step up into someone else's shoes that are much bigger than mine to fill, uh, gives me a lot of confidence in my decision making. So with that, I have been very focused on trying to replicate that as much as possible in my online classrooms. And that would include both synchronous classrooms as well as asynchronous classrooms. So synchronous, obviously we all taught these during COVID, but I taught some synchronous prior, and asynchronous, in addition to teaching a few classes in an asynchronous program, I'm the program director of a Master's of Science program in digital marketing, which is a fully online, fully asynchronous program. So I'm involved in not only the development of my classes, but also the development of all of the courses in our program. So I think about this a lot, and I want to try to replicate not only the dynamic learning, but also all of those things on the previous slide, the collaboration and the engagement and the self-confidence and all of that. So I have some tips that I put together. First about the synchronous environment, and then about asynchronous. And then I have some sort of key takeaways that pertain to both. So open to your questions. I can probably look at them as I talk or save them till the end. Totally up to you guys, but feel free to write them as you think of them. So starting with synchronous, the four key things that I sort of theme my advice down to is class engagement, whiteboarding, breakout rooms, and grade incentives. And you'll see grade incentives take another appearance on the asynchronous as well. So starting with class engagement, as much as possible, I really try to, in a synchronous environment, I really try to replicate the live classroom as much as I can. So I know here at Rutgers, at least, we can't force students to have their cameras on. But if you create an environment where they're forced to participate at a high level, the cameras kind of come on because they can't do much else besides be in my classroom at once. They can't really multitask so well the way I try to teach these synchronously. To get them warmed up with the fact that they're expected to participate, when I'm teaching a case class, and I do not do this with every class the way Harvard Business School is for sure, but when I bring a case into a class, I start with an icebreaker so that they kind of just get warmed up talking and hearing from each other. And I'll ask them an icebreaker question that everyone has an answer to, so they have to say something, and it's not too personal that they'll be afraid to share, but at the same time, it tells you something about them that's more than what you could guess meets the eye. So, for example, a good warm-up question I might ask is, when you were younger, what did you eat for breakfast in the morning? What did you usually do for breakfast before, elementary school? And that tells them, first of all, they have an answer, even if the answer is I didn't eat breakfast, which, I don't eat breakfast. But like if someone says I never ate breakfast, that's still an answer. But when they think about their childhood, it's sort of like personal. And if they were someone that, who woke up super early or woke up super late or didn't have two parents in the home, like it shares something personal about them, sort of, as much as they want to, but in a very benign way. So, my mom was working, so I just grabbed a donut or something, so like the way people share is just something interesting and personal enough, just to sort of whet their appetite for talking. Then I do usually at Rutgers, because cold calling and case method is not like in the DNA of this place, I will do warm calls. So what that means is the day before, I will ask someone to open up the case the next day. So they've been given a heads up. They're not completely caught unawares with that sinking feeling of like, did she just call on me? The way Jim might have felt for that second that I asked him if he was going to close the mine. And they feel like they're on the hook, though, because they are being asked to prepare in front of their peers. And so knowing that any of them could be warm called, the students help each other out a little bit by being prepared, so that when the person talks for 15 minutes, or I do 5 or 10 minutes, then someone else will have the courtesy of being able to respond to what they said in a meaningful way. So that kind of puts them on the hook a little bit more to help each other out. I do a lot of real-time polling. I try to replicate the raising of the hands or the emoji, like clap if you, thumbs up if you agree with him, just things that keep them connected the same way I would use real-time polling like Echo Poll in a class, in a live class. So just ways to keep them more connected to the content, having to do something and give some feedback. I also like to use multimedia as much as possible, just to break up the time so that it's not just all hearing from each other, but you can also hear directly from the case protagonist. And here's a video about, the Anglo-America or about mining, just so that they can feel more like in the moment and in the part and play along. And sometimes video helps with that. The next tip is whiteboarding. Now, there are a lot of technology tools out there for whiteboarding. On the right of this slide here, I have a setup that you can watch this video if you like. Frances Fry is one of my favorite professors. I follow everything she does. And she does a lot of online asynchronous case teaching. And she has a very sophisticated setup. And she loves the tech of it. She has a whole soundboard you can see. And she gives tutorials on what her setup looks like. And you can see the result is she's got 3 screens showing at any given time. She has her face, she has her whiteboard or her blackboard, which is her tablet, and she has a multimedia case of some sort, video, imagery running so that you can feel like you're in the moment of the case. This is, to be honest, a little too tech savvy for me. I would be fiddling around with this stuff while I'm in the moment of trying to teach. And I personally want to focus on the teaching. And this doesn't come as natural to me. So I'm really old school simple with this, but it still does the trick. I will pull up, if not the Zoom whiteboard, I will pull up Excel or PowerPoint or Word doc even, and I will just start writing the stuff they're saying as they're saying it on the board. So I'm basically creating a board through the share screen, feature of Zoom. And in the case of this particular screenshot here that you can see, I pre-populated, I pre-made a grid because I knew I wanted their comments to populate a grid at the end of the day. And as they talked about, new features, I created new rows. And then I populated them as they spoke. And then after the class was over, I had a finished Blackboard, if you will, just like as if we were an in-person classroom, that I then was able to upload to Canvas. And so they had all the notes from the board after we were done talking. So low tech, but really did the trick and gave them really organized notes at the end. The third tip I would have about synchronous case method teaching is to use the breakout rooms. So depending upon how large my class is, if it's like 20 people, I probably don't need a breakout room because there's enough back and forth that I can try to keep everybody engaged. But if it's much bigger than that, I sometimes try to do a breakout room where I will have separate groups of 2 to 4 develop their own solutions to the problem in the case, and then maybe come together and then go around the horn and each person sort of presents something new that they haven't heard before. Sometimes I will ask them to each group to tackle a different aspect of the same case, or other times I will I'll split the class down the middle, and I'll have half the class prepare a case on company A and the other half prepare a case on company B. And then when we talk about, I don't know, like if we're talking about some concept of marketing, if we're talking about social media or something, I will have the breakout rooms be comprised of 2 people who read company A and 2 people who read company B. And their job is to teach each other about the cases. And then together as a group of 4, come up with some key takeaways that both companies did to, this end about social media. And so that way, when we come back in, we're not necessarily hashing out the details of one case and then another case altogether, but we're all sharing the key takeaways that these smaller breakout groups came up with. And then we're using the different case studies as examples of how they were used in the real world. But it puts these participants on the hook to participate, because now they're being asked to teach someone else in the class before they come together and represent. And then the fourth way, that's always a goodie, is to reward participation. And this is really the currency that keeps them all in the game, which is, first of all, I want them to spend more time preparing for cases than they would any other type of assignment. And so to make that clear that they are meant to do more rigorous analysis and back up their opinions with evidence from the case and spend the time doing that, I either make cases their own discrete assignment category, so that if they aren't performing well in the cases, they're going to see that visually, that bucket of assignments is low. Or I lump it in with all the other assignments, but I weight it heavier. So if they get 100 points on their other assignments, they would be given 150 for this type of assignment. I want them to visually see that this is a more rigorous preparation and that they should spend the time on it. In a in-person classroom or in a online synchronous classroom, I use, for cases at least, if not for every class, certainly for cases, I try to use some variation of a peer evaluated participation grading program. And when students know they're being evaluated by their peers and that everyone is on the hook to speak, they tell us at the end of the semester that they feel more comfortable speaking because it's leveled the playing field. They don't have to worry about how they sound. They don't have to worry that their opinion doesn't matter as much as someone else's. And they know that we're rewarding not just frequency of speaking, but the quality of what you're saying, and that your peers are evaluating you. And so you want to reciprocate. So you want them to evaluate you well, and so you want to perform well. So there's this sort of community connection and obligation to perform. The model that I'm going to show you is just one model. It was created by a professor at the business school, John Ousley. And I use kind of a version of this where I might, depending on how large the class is, I may ask 3 or 4 students to serve as evaluators for that session. When you serve as an evaluator, you automatically get full credit for participation that day. You don't have to participate in the case discussion. And we rotate who becomes an evaluator. So they all have a turn. And their job, and I may divide the class into groups depending upon how many students there are. If it's small enough, they may just write about everybody, but they're going to list the students who are speaking, and then they're going to rate the quality of each of the comments they made in the class. So you can see in this case, we gave them 0 to 3 points for each comment they made, and they write some notes. And at the end of the class, they give me the feedback forms, and they're trained at the beginning of the semester. We tell them that that the comments, what makes a quality 3, number ranking 3 comment. It's got to be, backed by evidence. It has to bring the conversation further. It has to address what someone else in the class has already said and either build on it or refute it. And so everyone is on the hook for having to participate, which keeps their cameras on and keeps them engaged because they know that it'll come out in their grade. Just going to see before I dive into, okay, no questions yet. So I'll dive into the asynchronous environments. And here I have, you don't engage with the class as much. You can engage with the class, but it's obviously not live. It's asynchronous. So I want to get you engaged with the case first. And I have to do that in a way that, engages the student with the content and not just with their classmates. So it's more important for them to be really engaged with the content than it is in the synchronized environment, because we're all together at the same time. So they have to engage with the case, they have to engage with each other, and I do that through partner work and through online forums. And again, I push the grade incentives to try to promote, for them to understand the currency of grading is the heaviness of the type of assignment. So starting with case engagement, it's more important here for me to do some illustration through multimedia and through videos and context setting, that I set the stage for the case. So I don't just dive into the case the way I did in this session with a picture of the mine and give you the scenario. When it comes to online asynchronous, I give them context first. So like, here's why we're talking about this today. Here's what it has to do with the rest of the course, where we came from. Here's some stats happening in the industry of whatever we're talking about. And now let's talk about the case, because now you know how it fits in with everything else. So I spend more time on the context setting. And then once the context is established, I think it's more important to share video and multimedia in asynchronous than it even is in synchronous. I like to use it for synchronous, but it's not a must-have. It breaks the class up a little bit. But for asynchronous, I think it's vital that there's some multimedia component so that you can get a real feel more than just the words on the page are going to give you. When I teach cases in an asynchronous environment, I typically slow them down. So when I want to create an opportunity for peer sharing and peer connection first, I'll break the peer part into 1 week and then the class discussion part into week 2. So oftentimes when I use a case asynchronously, I can't just fit it into one class session. I have to stretch it out to 2, just so that everyone has time during the week to get to the first part and peer review each other and talk to each other and meet with their breakout groups. And then the second week, when they've learned from each other, they can share their collective learnings. So I've learned over time that I have to fit them into the course differently. The other thing I've learned really recently, and this is particularly important with asynchronous, but it also relates to synchronous, is that the questions you ask them to prepare about the case have to reflect the reality of Gen AI today. Because just asking like case summary questions or, run some kind of an industry framework or model of this organization based upon the facts in the case, like anyone can do that with ChatGPT. You can ask ChatGPT to run a SWOT analysis for you or a pestle analysis or whatever analysis for you based on this case. And guess what? It knows the case. It knows who wrote it. It knows what year. It knows the summary. It knows the protagonist. You could create a pretty, decent case analysis using Gen AI. So instead, the kinds of questions I now ask are more personal. So I might ask them to draw upon what we talked about last week in class to explain why this company may have done X, Y, and Z. So it requires a connection to other course content. Or I may ask them to do something in the real world that connects to the case. So, for example, there's a case about a social media strategy for a company, and the case takes place 10 years ago. I'm asking the students to go to those social media pages today and talk about the way their posts or the way they might measure the performance of their posts have changed between today versus the time of the case, and to, post a specific example of a post that they're analyzing to come to these conclusions. So it takes a little bit more work for me to figure out the kinds of questions I can ask that actually makes them get into the guts of the case a little bit. And knowing that they still may go to ChatGPT to learn about the case, but at least they're learning about the case and they're having to analyze the case in context of something else on their own. So those are the kinds of ways I involve them with the case. And just as an example, here is the kind of context setting that I do. So before you dive into the case, here's the reality. Here's how much time we spend online. Here's the kind of sites we spend them on. Here's how much ad revenue is generated by these sites. And here's the biggest companies that exist on the internet. And now you're going to read a case about Google and Meta, because those are two of the biggest, and we're going to go deeper. But I set context for why we're focusing on those two companies with this context. And then on the right here is an example of a multimedia case. This is a very pure native multimedia case. This was created in order to be a multimedia case. So you can read text about the protagonist, and then you can watch some videos to bring the protagonist to life. And these exist. These multimedia cases exist. They're not the norm, and they're not the typical. So I usually, more often than not, am taking my own case studies that I find in the industry, or using, a Harvard Business School case study, and I'm bringing the videos in. I'm not usually using a comprehensive package like this, but these do exist. So I'm bringing in the video about the mines to show them what it's like to be inside of a mine, or, I bring them into Anglo American and show them what the company is like, and that kind of a thing. The next tip about asynchronous environments is partner work. So if the previous tip related to how to get users connected to the content, this one is how to get them connected to each other when you're in an asynchronous environment. And we don't have the luxury of breakout sessions here because we're not all online at the same time. I have students all over the world and in different time zones, and who have different needs in their families, and they work at different times of the week and different times of the day. So what I'll do is I will have them read, like I said, companion cases, or take different personas within the same case, different protagonists or different characters within the same case. And although I can't set up breakout rooms, I can set up peer reviews through Canvas. And so when they submit their initial case analysis questions, they don't submit them to me. They submit them to their partner who's from the other group. And those pairs will have to read each other's papers and give, feedback. And I encourage them to speak to each other beyond, but I don't require it because it's asynchronous. So sometimes they speak to each other only through the comments of their grade, which is fine. Or sometimes they set up a Zoom or a FaceTime and they do chat, but they don't have to. And they are filling out a rubric for each other in terms of how much they learned from the other one and how deep they went with their analysis. And that's part of their grade. So that's a full grade is what their peer gives them. And then the second part of the grade will lead me to my next point, which is the online forums. So once they've learned about the other company from their partner, then in an online discussion board to the whole class, they are pulling out compare and contrast the two different ways these companies handled political factors, changing politics or changing legal factors and regulation. So they became expert, for example, in what Google does because that was the case they were assigned. They learned from their partner what Meta did in face of the same regulations or political changes. And then they have to come to the conclusion independently of how the two companies handled things differently and the same, and which one is more successful in handling it and why, and they do that on their own. So that's kind of how I try to get them to share with everybody. And then in order to get like the board, like I want to try to replicate the classroom Blackboard that is the summary of the key points that I want to facilitate to them getting to. How I do that is when I'm grading the discussion boards, as I'm grading them, I'm keeping like a running list of the key themes that they've come up with. And of course, I probably have 5 or so key themes I want them to come up with, key takeaways. But they more than likely come up with those 5 on their own, plus a few more. So usually they'll bring something into the conversation that I hadn't necessarily expected. Sometimes occasionally they miss one of my 5 that I wanted to bring up, but I will then create a new page on Canvas that's the key takeaways from the case discussion. And I will bring up those 5 points. I will give them some optional other thoughts that they should keep in mind that came up in the conversation. And when they have an exam, this is the page that they're studying from. So they don't have to go back and reread the case. They're not being tested on the case content per se, but they are being, tested on the key takeaways they were supposed to get from those case discussions. So this page here that I just showed you is like the key takeaway page that I spend time creating based upon their class discussion. And that's why asynchronously a case might take 2 weeks, because of each of those steps as we build up toward this key takeaway. So I have one more takeaway on the asynchronous side, which again is back to grades. Now, I can't do, peer evaluation the way we do it for synchronous, because we're not live and no one's listening to you explaining your point of view. But I can grade them on that peer review swapping, paper swapping step of the process. And so they feel like they're on the hook, and it's kind of embarrassing if your partner gives you something that's really robust and deep and rigorous, and you're handing in something that's kind of high level. And so they do feel a little bit obligated to create I think they do at least, to create something for their peers and not just for their professor. And then when they go on the discussion board, of course, they have to comment on each other. So there's that kind of peer collaboration as well. And I ask them to comment, not just like make a comment, but, either to reinforce an argument that they've made or to refute an argument that they've made with evidence, either way. So they're being asked to, again, peer evaluate each other. And that comment on classmate post is also part of their grade as well. So that's the asynchronous side. So in terms of like my high level key takeaways for both is definitely use video and multimedia cases or multimedia cases when you're using cases to teach online. I should have had my first bullet here be case method is fabulous for most things, not exclusively and not in some cases, but to encourage you, if you haven't tried doing cases in your classes, to try. That would be actually my first bullet that should have been on this page. The next one is how to do it effectively. Use videos, use multimedia cases where they're available. Use technology strategically. Don't let the tech scare you. Don't use tech for tech's sake. Use it as you need, as it's comfortable while you're going. My last point here is to be responsive and flexible. There's been lots of times that I'm teaching a case and I feel like, Bueller, like no one's participating, or it doesn't feel like their discussion board posts in an asynchronous class are that inspiring. They seem kind of bored. I've had to switch gears. I've had to say, okay, let's do breakout sessions instead. Or while we're doing asynchronous, throw in a new question. Like, I don't like the kinds of responses we're getting. Let's look at this from a different angle. Pick a company in your life that was similar to this company, and then they get a little bit more excited because they get to talk about something more personal. So be flexible. And so don't let your technology be so rigid that you can't be flexible, I guess is a good point. Design grading that in such a way that you have accountability to your peers, and that peer accountability creates higher quality participation and more engagement. So definitely think about ways you can incorporate peer-to-peer accountability. Design assignment questions that, don't crack AI, because you're not going to crack AI, but that require them to think beyond just using AI. So definitely think about that, whether you're in person, synchronous or asynchronous, using cases. And then weight your assignments proportionately in terms of grades, because students really do, for whether it's graduate or undergraduate, they really do speak in the currency of grades. And so I found that to be an important component of keeping them engaged with these types of class exercises. So with that, I will be happy to take questions. So Jim, seems like AI would make it challenging to evaluate was the student prepared on both the synchronous and asynchronous delivery models. It does. The prepared part, I don't grade separately. At the end of the day, if they prepared themselves using AI or not, I could make an argument for, good on you. You're going to use it at work too to prepare yourself for something. But how you perform in real time, synchronously, in terms of the quality of your comments and bringing things forward and knowing and building on someone else's points and, addressing someone else's points and not just, word vomit facts, I think is an important component of quality. And online, being able to incorporate and asynchronously being able to incorporate what their partner taught them and what they taught their partner, I think puts them on the hook for at least sounding like they know what they're talking about. And then taking that to another level and saying, let's apply that to the questions I said that are better for beating AI. So apply that to what we talked about in class 2 weeks ago about, X, Y, and Z, or apply this to something else in your life, or apply this to, take a screenshot of a post that's out there or a website that's out there and compare and contrast the case then versus this. Not to say you can't use AI for that, but it's an application that they'll still learn from. So it is hard to crack AI, but in life, they're going to use AI too. So as long as I can, it's a work in progress. As long as I can keep them thinking and in new ways, even if they use AI to get to the end result, we're all doing it in real time. Agreed. And I'm happy to share my slides. Are there any other questions? I don't know, Hannah, the slides that I submitted to the conference, do those automatically get posted somewhere, or should I be sending them out on my own?
Well, with the other presenter, what we did, she used a Google Drive and she put the slide deck and any other presentation materials through Google Drive. Or I know I just got an email from the our team, and they can do make a public link, the Dropbox public link, so I can share it. We can share that.
Okay.
Through.
I uploaded it earlier, so I didn't know if that was automatically going out. That's fine. And thanks, Nellie. So how do I approach selecting case studies to ensure they're relevant, especially in rapidly evolving environments? So I somehow managed to keep using older cases, and I'm deliberately still doing that. Every semester I revisit whether I should replace them, and every semester I decide that those are still the most relevant for the topic. And so the question for me is not how do I find the most recent relevant case studies? The question is, how do I make a good case study relevant to today? So I consider that my challenge. So for example, the social media case study that I mentioned, that case study that I still use takes place in 2013. And it's about a B2B company first deciding whether or not and how to join social media, like to be social. And today that may seem trite and ridiculous, but it creates a good conversation. And of course, the platforms are a little different and all the details are a little small and different. But the strategy is really relevant because it's like, why does a B2B company live on social, and should they? And why would they be on a consumer platform, and should they? And so we have these strategy discussions that is inspired by this decision a company made 10 years ago or more. And then I connect it with, well, what are they doing today? And why do you think they evolved to where they are today? So I don't replace case studies as often as you would think. I replace the questions I ask them to come up with on the case study more often. The paper chase sounds familiar, but I don't think I ever saw it, but now I'm going to. And I only use probably maybe 3 a semester, depends on the class, like 3 or 4. I do it every few weeks. I don't do them, and some of them take 2 weeks at a time to do. So I don't do them every single week or every single day or multiple a day. That's right. That's right. Any other questions? Thank you. Thanks, Joy. Joy's been helping me with Echo Poll, so I'm glad I gave it a plug. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Happy St. Patrick's Day, too.
Thank you so much for great presentation, Dr. Short.
Thank you.
And yeah, I think we have at 4:50, yeah, closing remark. And then yeah, conference is over today.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, so your slides will be shared through the public link, the Box public link with
Okay.
attendees later.
Perfect. All right. So I don't have to post it anywhere.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.